I heard and welcome Foreign Minister Wong's announcement of resuming funds to the agency. It's a much expected decision, and again, I'm glad and relieved. But I would like to use this opportunity to draw lessons from this suspension of funds, which in my view was a hasty decision, because this was taken without any evidence that the agency as such was implicated in the October 7 attack against Israel. And in the face of UNRWA already taking measures, because UNRWA immediately terminated the people allegedly involved in the October 7 attack. But also, what is serious is that Australia and other governments took as face value the information that was provided by a government that has a track record of lies. And also, after 2 months of not having evidence from that government, and the evidence that they had shared with some was deemed as not conclusive to any responsibility. So after 2 months of non-existing evidence, and in the face of track record of fabrications by the government of Israel, I find this delay at least questionable. Also now it appears, according to an investigation that UNRWA has carried out, that the confessions from the staff members allegedly involved in the attack, in the 7th of October attack, were extracted under coercion, so using torture, which is all too common against Palestinians. And this is something I have fully documented in one of my reports. So look, my conclusion is making mistakes is understandable, but persevering is unacceptable. And I think it's about time that Australia distances itself from Israel, which is violating not only international law, but also the interim ruling of the ICJ. It has violated all measures ordered by the ICJ. And I was surprised not to hear any words of condemnation by the Australian foreign ministers for Israel's conduct, which is clearly amounting to atrocities. It's time to impose sanctions and an arms embargo on Israel.
There is an independent UN investigation continuing into the Israeli allegations about the UNRWA workers. What do you say to those who argue the Australian government should have waited until the outcome of that, because that's what the opposition is saying in Australia?
Yeah, it's totally normal. Because first of all, as I said, how do you take such serious measures? Because the defunding would not just impact UNRWA's operations in Gaza. At the time, UNRWA is providing essential support to a distraught population, which is being bombed among mass destruction, 30,000 people killed, among whom 13,000 children. And so the defunding has affected or would affect operations across the region. So what was the point of punishing the entire agency for possible crimes committed by individual staff members? So it was absolutely hasty, to say the least.
Israel remains intent on getting rid of UNRWA, saying it's fatally compromised. How do you feel about the Israeli insistence on that?
And this is the point, Joe. Israel has done everything possible to get rid of the agency for over a decade now, because it deems the agency responsible for the existence of the Palestinian refugee problem, which, allow me to remember, is an Israeli problem, because the millions of Palestinians who are still refugees are from Israel, from 1947-49, and there are many of them from 1967, the forced displacement that occurred in these two big instances. But again, so you see, Australia and other countries which suspended funds to UNRWA played into the court of this Israel's design to get rid of a UN agency. This is appalling to my assessment.
And Francesca Albanese, what's your latest information on just how dire the situation is on the ground in Gaza right now?
It's horrific. It's horrific, and I have no more words to describe all this. You know, Joe, when I was in Australia, about 4,000 people had been killed, 4,000 Palestinians. And this doesn't take away, doesn't downplay, doesn't condone the crimes that have been committed against Israelis on October 7. But when the death toll was 4,000, for me, it was already abysmal. And now the death toll has reached 30,000. There are 71,000 injured. And if those who are missing, who are presumably dead under the rubble, which is between 8,000 and 12,000, are confirmed dead, the death toll will become over 40,000. This is abysmal. This is unprecedented in our times. And this is why I say, how can democratic governments stand idle in the face of these atrocities?
I interviewed an IDF spokesman recently, and he said the civilians in Rafah would be able to be relocated before the full-scale Israeli assault on Rafah to get rid of the remaining Hamas fighters. He argued they had moved people around Gaza before over the last several months as they moved through neighbourhoods. What do you say to this argument?
So first of all, they have not moved people around. They have forcibly displaced nearly 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, trapped in an enclave from which they could not flee, from which they could not escape. Israel has bombed the zones that it had unilaterally declared safe. It has killed people while they were gathering for aid. To my sense, any Israeli government officials or military officials have no credibility on whatever concerns the safety of the Palestinians in Gaza. And another assault on Rafah is going to add horror to what is already existing, the catastrophe that has already been provoked in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, just how, because the Israeli government put that deadline of March 10 on saying Hamas must release the hostages or we're going to go into Rafah regardless. How concerned are you about what could happen over the coming month?
I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned for the hostages as much as concerned for the Palestinians. And I have the feeling that this has never been a war to release the hostages, because no real attempt has been made other than furthering destruction that, by the way, hampers the hostages as well, because they cannot escape the fate that has befallen the entire Palestinian population trapped in Gaza. I don't see how Israel, after 5 months, can keep on claiming that its primary interest is to release the hostages, because the hostages cannot be released by bombing. And of course, I look for the day the hostages can be returned home safely, together with the other 1,000 Palestinians who have been arbitrarily detained as of the 7th of October and before.
And it's getting on to 6 months now since the start of this war. You're a key person advocating for the civilians caught in the middle of this. What are you? Give us an insight into what you are doing day to day to try to bring about a situation where the civilians can survive through this, and how do you, after nearly 6 months now, how do you feel about where this is?
Hi, Joe. You are asking me to comment on my deep sense of frustration and powerlessness, because eventually I've done absolutely nothing. If I look at the reality, whatever, all the days and weeks, each hour devoted to stop the carnage in Gaza has led to nothing other than an awakening. I do think that if one thing I've done, I've probably contributed to the realization of how brutal and unjustified this attack on Gaza was. Because since the beginning, and I was in Australia, when I cried out loud, you cannot claim that this is self-defense, and invoking the application of international law, which has been violated through and through. Not one single rule of international humanitarian law has been respected. And what I do in my daily life is receiving allegations, trying to inform the general people, both at the UN and the larger public, about the reality in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, because it's not that there is paradise in the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory. And some member countries have reacted. Look at South Africa, look at countries from the global south. And this is the revealing moment of the current reality. Sorry, this is how revealing this moment is, in the sense that there is an awareness from the global south that these double standards, this hypocrisy that the West continues to further over and over cannot be accepted anymore.
But the Israeli Defence Force continues to argue that Hamas committed those atrocities back on October 7, and it lives and operates among the civilian population, and it's determined to stop Hamas committing such atrocities again.
They've not succeeded. They've killed 30,000 people plus. They've injured 70,000 people plus. And I can tell you, I've seen with my own eyes children who have been evacuated from Gaza without limbs, being paralyzed for life. And this is because while they were taking shelter, including in UNRWA premises. There is no excuse. Look, as I said, I've never condoned the crimes that have been committed against Israeli civilians, the killing, the taking of hostages, the fear and the terror spread. But I've also said there is a context to this, and all the more. How can what Hamas or other Palestinian paramilitary groups have done on the 7th of October justifies what Israel is doing in Gaza, what Israel has already done in Gaza? A crime never justifies another crime. But again, the reaction moved by rage, humiliation, sense of defeat among Israelis has provoked a reality of an unprecedented gravity. And I think it will take generations for the Palestinians to recover, but also to the Israelis, when they will have the full picture of what they have done. Because I also believe that the Israelis are not fully aware of the level of destruction and pain that has been inflicted on civilians in Gaza. Because Israel considers the entire Palestinian population in Gaza responsible for what Hamas or others have done, which is against any basic principles of international law, as I've already said.